Hey everybody, I want to thank you for joining us for this month's Expertise in Business webinar series. I'm Eric Hobbs, CEO of Technology Associates, and I'll be our moderator for today. So a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you have questions, go ahead and put them into your question chat thing on your control panel. I will see those, and I'll be able to field those questions to Brandon. We're really excited to have Brandon Ives with us here today. So I know this is something that we struggle with as a small business around brand strategy and marketing. When Brandon and I ran through this earlier this week, he had just so much awesome information on brand strategy that we have taken the marketing piece, and Brandon has at least tentatively agreed to come back and present that piece separately. So there's a lot of great information here today. So Brandon, he's Managing Partner and Chief Strategist of the award-winning Brasco Marketing firm, and he'll be kind of giving us the ins and outs on brand strategy. So without further ado, Brandon, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Eric, I appreciate that introduction, and hello everyone, thank you for joining us. And as Eric mentioned, as we were talking earlier this week, we realized that it would be very difficult to try to cover essentially one or two topics, one being around branding and your brand strategy, and the other being around marketing and your marketing strategy. Now, we will touch on both on the marketing piece today and talk about how those two work together and some best practices there, but we definitely thought it made sense to sort of make that potentially a secondary webinar down the road here. So what we're going to do today is talk about evaluating your brand strategy, and if you have or if you are considering or possibly in the process of rebranding, this will be very helpful to you. And once again, thank you to Eric and his company, Technology Associates, Rich Commercial Realty, and Insperity today for presenting and hosting us here. And once again, my name is Brandon Ives, and I'm going to switch to the next slide here. Here we go. And I'm with Brasco, and essentially what Brasco is essentially we work with our clients on all sorts of things. We are a creative branding and online marketing agency based here in Raleigh. Been working with clients since 2006, providing these services. In 2010, we rebranded ourselves for the first time. Before that, prior to that, we were really mainly a creative design firm. So we did a lot of graphic design, web design work. In 2010, we rebranded ourselves to become more of a full-service communications and marketing strategy agency. So the way we do things is our strategy work leads everything else we do, because we believe it's important to have that plan in place. And so my role with the company is sort of to lead strategy, client strategy, and I'm also a partner in the agency. So what we're going to do is kind of just roll right into it real quick, talk about branding a little bit. There are a lot of misconceptions out there about branding, and as a marketing person who works and talks this every single day, I can tell you that the word branding is one of the most overused words that we hear in this field. And essentially, it's overused, I believe, for a few different reasons. One, people don't really understand the real terminology, and then number two, I think people just kind of use it the wrong way. So we'll talk about what it is and what it isn't. You know, one thing that it's not is it's really not just one thing. It's sort of a culmination of a lot of different things and a lot of different aspects of your company. It's not really just about your service or just about your product either, and it's not really just your logo or your website, although those are pieces of how we visualize the brand, and we'll talk about that. What it really is it's about your company, and it's more about where you want to be, where your company really wants to be, and sort of what your place in the world is going to be. It's also about how we want to make our customers feel and sort of the interaction and engagement with our customers. So we'll talk about that. And then also we will talk about sort of the visualization and sort of the image that we want to portray and sort of the perception aspect of the brand. So Eric and I were talking about this earlier this week as well, which was sort of what do you want your customers to feel? And it's a lot easier for companies that have tangible products to sort of get this point hammered down. And a lot of these companies that I've listed here have done this very well. But if you're a services-focused company or a service provider or professional services, it can be harder, and it's still very achievable, but it's definitely something that takes a little bit more work. So we will talk about that as well. But here's some examples of companies that have just hit a home run in this area. If you think about Dairy Queen and what they've been able to do over the last 50, 60 years, essentially they've been able to maintain a sort of classic American feel in the experience that they provide. So when you go there, you're typically going for ice cream, although they've evolved over the years to have the DQ Grill and the Orange Julius, which they purchased and then actually, I believe, recently have started to get out of. And I know this because we've worked with Dairy Queen before. But essentially, they've kind of created that sort of classic feel, that vibe when you walk in there, that you feel comfortable and you kind of feel like you're taking it back, that family atmosphere. You know, Apple, we don't really have to rehash too much. Everyone knows the Steve Jobs story. But what he was able to do so many different times was to essentially make things easier, which, although we've had some hiccups here recently,
like yesterday.
like yesterday, and, you know, but that's been his mantra. And essentially, you know, the whole sort of innovation of what he did with music and, you know, the iPod and everything, you know, he's done that time and time again. So when you think about Apple, you think about innovation, and you kind of get that feel visually, but you also, in all their advertising, their messaging, that's just what comes across. And I think finally their leadership is starting to kind of figure it out a little bit, kind of crossing that hump here over the last year or so. Disney, it's all about the experience. It's all about their movies. They make you feel something extremely special when you watch those movies, when you visit their parks, when you purchase any of their products. You know, I took my family to Disney World last year, and you know, we went to the Disney stores and bought all these different things. And so even now when they're in my kids' room, it just takes me back thinking about that experience when I was there. And so it's that magic sort of that they create. So, you know, how do we create our own magic as companies in our brands? And that can be hard to do. Here at Brasco, we've, you know, sort of redesigned our own process for how we work with clients, and this is something that works for us. I'm sure other agencies have different processes, but this is one that hasn't worked for us, that we've sort of molded over the years. And it takes you through discovery, market evaluation, brand positioning, messaging strategy, creative execution, and the results. And so we'll talk about those 6 different points here today. And we just recently, Brasco, over the last 2 months, have gone through our own rebranding process, which has been very difficult. It's very difficult as a marketing agency to do your own branding, which is really why a lot of companies work with consultants or other agencies when they go through this process, because it's good to have that third-party sort of perspective on things. We actually really considered bringing in a third party to work with us on that, and ultimately ended up thinking that, come on, we should be able to do this, even though this is what we do, right? But it's just very hard to do your own stuff. But, you know, essentially we had to do a lot of sort of pulling off family, friends, advisors, and things that even clients that we work with to get feedback. And essentially, we've gone through all this whole process ourselves. And one of the, you know, we've sort of rebranded ourselves around this whole idea of authenticity. Around, you know, we believe that people want to work with people that they trust, people that they know are going to have their best, you know, interests at heart, and that are going to be authentic. And so we believe that, you know, our people represent that, and that's something that we've rebranded ourselves around, this whole idea of be authentic. So if we look at sort of the first step in this process of rebranding and creating a brand strategy, and it starts with discovery. So it's really about asking the right questions. And so one thing that we found that works is when we are in this sort of discovery process, typically we're able to knock this out depending on the sort of scope and size of the project and client within a couple of meetings, depending on what we're doing exactly. But we take a very journalistic approach to it, and this is what I would recommend for you if you're going through this process. Is you've got to really ask a lot of questions, and sometimes really hard questions. So you want to sort of separate or segment your questions out in this discovery process and kind of ask questions where you're looking inward. Think about where your company is, where you want it to be in the future. Look inward in terms of your own sort of value that you're providing to customers, and so what is your unique value proposition there? And what are the differentiators in there for your company? Sometimes we'll ask the question, if your company went out of business tomorrow, would your customers really care? And that can be a hard question to ask and be slightly offensive to some people who work really hard to kind of build their companies up. But you have to really think about, well, why would we ask that question? And the reason why we ask that question is, how woven into your customers' everyday lives are you? Is it just something that you're doing that you're sort of top of mind? I mean, are you always top of mind? Are your people tied in with sort of multiple layers of sort of integration with your people and your customers? I think those are important questions because you really want to be as valuable as possible as you can to your customers, and to be able to help them in multiple different ways, and from a relationship standpoint, but also from the products and services that you offer. So that's something we often talk about. And then you want to look outward. So you want to really sort of, once you've looked, you've kind of gone through that process of thinking about who we are and sort of who we want to be and how we're going to be different and provide the most value. You want to look outward and think about, okay, looking at our market, at our customers, and trying to really understand what their needs are and how we can sort of fit into that need. And also, I'm really big about sort of trying to find that emotional tag, that emotional trigger point, because that is really what ultimately triggers purchase decisions and action. You're trying to invoke that emotion that's going to get them to move to action. And so that's one of the biggest things we're trying to really discover in this process. Then we move to the market, and we're just really continuing this evaluation, but taking it from sort of internal discovery to more of market evaluation and discovery. And that would be sort of the next phase here. So one of the big things I like to always try to find out is really what's the personality of your industry or your market. And they're all different. And actually Eric and I were talking about this as well, which is, for a company like his or like mine, we work with lots of different types of companies, and we work in lots of different types of markets. So to sort of define a personality of our market can be hard. So then what we, in that case, if that's the case for you, or if you're sort of B2C and you're selling to everyone, and you're providing a service or a product for everyone, then again, that might be difficult to do. So what you would want to do there would be sort of focus on what's the personality of your industry. So just kind of turn it, flip it around, and look back and say, well, what do people think about IT services companies? What do people think about marketing agencies? What do people think about physicians' offices, law firms? And what's the personality of our market? So it's not really about our customers at that point. It's more about us there. And the reason why we want to understand this personality is because we want to know the preconceived sort of emotions that are already there, that already exist with our customers before they even interact with us, but when they're thinking about it. And we're trying to define that piece. I mentioned the perceptions and misconceptions in your industry. We want to be able to sort of break through some of this if we can. And then we also want to know the players. So I'm always much more focused on the audience segmentation piece of it. Folks will go a little bit deeper on the competitive side. I typically try to stay, I'm very much more surface level on competition. I tend to think that if you focus more on yourself and what you're trying to do, you'll be successful. You can get lost in the competition very easily. So that would be my one recommendation there. It's good to know about your competition for sure, and to sort of just see what's going on, but to try to emulate or to try to just get too hung up on that piece of it can be detrimental. And then I'm also big in terms of my own experience, things that I've seen work for us in previous companies that I've worked with or have owned in the past is partnership. Looking for those strategic partners that can have a mutual beneficial relationship is very important. There are caveats there, though, that you can really use a lot of energy creating those partnerships and taking that channel partner marketing approach. They can be very beneficial, but you want to kind of think about that and limit those.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
Can you go back to the last slide? So a couple of questions. One of our attendees asked, can you give an example of perceptions and misconceptions in your industry? And then as part of that question, give an example of personality of an industry market. And I may be able to kind of get that started. You know, we do technology. People define our market by, you know, your standard tech geek. And the misperception is that all IT companies are alike, and nothing could be further from the truth. So if you could maybe kind of take that and expand on it a little.
Sure. One example would be if you are an engineering firm, and I think we all have our own sort of perception of what engineering or who an engineer really is. And I'm more thinking from the construction industry because I have some experience in that area. Particularly, but engineers really sort of have this sort of stodgy, you know, brainy sort of mentality, and that can be something that can be hard to sort of overcome in terms of customer interaction. So one thing you want to think about is if that is indeed something that exists as a perception of engineers in general, what can we be doing to sort of break ourselves out of that? So that would be one example there. And if you think about industries and markets, and I think you and I talked about this briefly, but this kind of steps into what we're going to talk about next, which is positioning and how you want to position your company. But essentially, if your company is selling to, let's say you're selling to law firms and you're selling to restaurants and you're selling to medical practices, for whatever reason, those are your theories, kind of a random theory, but then those are all three of those sort of industries or verticals have very different personalities, right? So if you go to a conference and you're representing your company, you're going to have to sort of reposition how you are talking about your company, potentially the conversations you're having, the value that your company provides is different for all three of those. I mean, I've been to many conferences with physicians, and that is much different than going to, let's say, a restaurant vendor conference. So you got to think about those things, because if you're not aware of those things, again, this is more pertinent probably to the B2B market.
Yeah, and a couple of things that came to mind, Brandon. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when it was kind of the unspoken rule that, you know, law firms didn't advertise at all, right? And now, you know, their market is getting competitive. They're having to do that. And you may sometimes decide to play towards the perceptions and misconceptions of your industry, like Geek Squad, right? They play it up as a strength.
Right, exactly. I mean, you know, I think during the strategy piece, you would want to just weigh those things. And so, actually, one of the things that comes out of this whole process is, and even out of a marketing planning process, is these ideas, things like what you just mentioned. During these conversations, as we're going through this, we'll take a lot of different little golden nuggets out of the conversation, and we'll kind of tuck those aside, because those could be things that we could go back to later to use for potential campaign or you know, approach in terms of online marketing or ad or you know, really anything. So that's one of the great things about going through this too, is that you'll think about things that you probably didn't really think about because you hadn't really had a chance to really sit down and do it. So absolutely. Were there any other questions there?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. So one example, as we're talking about the evaluating the market here, a company that we have been working with for many years is a company called Progress Solar Solutions. They essentially came to us when essentially they were developing their own market. And what they do is they manufacture here in the United States and locally. They manufacture and sell mobile solar light towers, like you see here. These can be used in all different types of conditions. They actually have the option to provide wind. They have the option to just run off a generator, so you can kind of run it at any point, whether there's any sunlight or wind at all. And so they're used for events and construction sites and things like that to provide light at all times. There was no one that was really providing this. They essentially kind of came up with this. I'm sure others were working on it, kind of like you read back in the history books on the telephone and the whole thing there, but people were working on these things, but they sort of mastered it first. So when you talk about evaluating the market, there wasn't a lot in terms of competition to evaluate. There was a lot in terms of customer segmentation and all that to evaluate. But over the years, the market grew. So they essentially softened the market for a lot of competitors. And now this is a much more competitive industry. And although they are still the leader in terms of, from what we can tell, manufacturing and sales of this particular product, there's a lot more out there. So we've had to go back here recently, as we've been working with them for 4 years now, and we're doing some rebranding with them now, that having to kind of go back and rehash a lot of these things that we touched on a little bit of, a few years ago, but the landscape has changed. So what I wanted to kind of really say there is that it's important to kind of do this, maybe every couple of years to at least evaluate and go through some sort of this brand evaluation process. Brasco has had, I guess, for ourselves, we've done this 3 times. A lot of larger companies will do this annually, but for sort of smaller SMBs, probably every 2 to 3 years would be a good sort of pace there. The next piece is positioning. So we talked about we've done the discovery part. We've looked inward, we've looked outward, we evaluated our audience, we've evaluated the market. We've got some ideas of kind of where we're going to really fit in. Now we've got to think about how we want to position ourselves. And for some reason, the REM song, "Stand in the Place Where You Were," comes to mind here, when actually what we want to do is stand in the place where we want to be. Because we got to think about, as I mentioned, the landscape's going to be changing. Well, if we're going through this process now, how can we go ahead and make sure that we're positioning our brand to be, forward-thinking, to be ahead of the curve? And so what's really important here is to make sure that we have thought about what are those sort of the list of the true value that we're offering, and why is it unique, and what are those differentiators, excuse me. And then, sort of how are we going to position ourselves? Kind of going back to that example that I mentioned, and when you're at the conference, you're going to have different conversations with different audiences. So you got to sort of think about that, because you may position your company, your service, your product slightly different by the audience, or it may just be slightly different by the market that you're in. So it just depends. And then that next step is messaging. So you want to move into thinking about how are we going to express. Now, everything that we've talked about, how are we really going to try to express this? And I like to say, so just sort of start with what you know. So whenever we work with customers in this situation on the messaging piece, this is something that I think is often overlooked by companies, but once we go through the exercise, it's very important, because what happens is we're going to essentially develop core messaging around the company, not necessarily around a certain product or service, but around the company, and thinking in terms of the vision, who your people are, what really kind of who we are. We're going to also develop what I call pop messaging, which may be a couple of different sort of variations on that. But pop messaging is sort of like you would think of it, sort of like an elevator pitch way. It's going to be sort of a shortened version of the core message. Then we're going to also develop audience-specific messaging because in some cases we are talking to our audience is segmented. We may, if we're selling into different markets, we may explore market messaging, and then service and product line messaging is going to be needed too, because we need to go into how are we going to position and sort of express the sort of the benefits and the values of what we offer in each service and in each product. So those things should be explored, and the sort of end result of this is that once you have this stuff created, that it's sort of the foundation of what you're trying to say and what you really want to say is there, that then you can use that as sort of a basis point to build on for everything such as website copy, advertising copy, anything else that you're doing. You have a place you can go to and sort of a starting point. And this is really who we are, what we're trying to do. This is what we've created as sort of our initial core messaging. Now, how can we change this to fit to a certain campaign that we're running? How can we change this to fit towards something specific that we're doing? And this can be, I think Eric asked me this question too, which, Eric, if I'm stealing your questions, I apologize. But he asked me, how do you sort of get to this point, in terms of developing the messaging and sort of that differentiation there. And so one exercise that we often will do with our clients is we'll sort of go around the room with all the key stakeholders and with our team and start sort of putting up, whether it be writing on a whiteboard, sort of a whiteboard session or post-it notes, just sort of words or phrases that describe us, right? And we may do that with the core messaging piece to start there. And we'll have 50 or so things, most of the time they're adjectives, right? And so what we'll do is we'll go through all those, and we'll end up finding out that out of 50 or so of these just sort of words, phrases, that they really sort of boil down into like 5 different categories. Sometimes maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 6. So we've sectioned them all off, and we're looking back and we're looking through them again. So like, these things sort of mean the same thing. They fall into this category. Well, these 2 categories really are not as important when it comes down to it. So let's nix that. So now we're left with 2 or 3 categories. Okay, these are, man, we're really having a hard time sort of prioritizing which one of these 3 things is more important. So why don't we try to include a little bit of all this into what we're trying to say and into that core message. And so that's a great starting point. It's a good exercise to do because it helps you get there. And like I mentioned, you'll start with what you know and you'll build on that.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes.
I think with some of these things, people in these exercises, they'll go right to the what I'll call the everybody stuff. World-class this, or industry-leading that, or trusted advisor of this, and those things you need to kind of sweep away, right?
I lost you. Those things do what now?
As far as unique selling position, when people glom on to the typical type of things that they would throw up there, like a world-class service provider, or industry leader in this, or being a trusted advisor, you just kind of wipe that stuff off the board, right? I mean, it's deeper than that, correct?
Right, yeah. So, right. A lot of times, and again, especially with professional services companies, those things tend to get splashed up on the board. And that's okay because when we go through these exercises, we do what we call green light exercises. There is no wrong answer. Everything's okay. Throw it up there. We're gonna talk about it. And so
you're a lot nicer than I would be.
Well, no, initially, right? Initially. And then we'll start slashing them down because we're like, this absolutely is not something that we're going to even really consider. Oh, we have the best customer service. Okay. Well, what does that mean? And that's one of the easy go-tos in sort of the professional services industry. as you mentioned, world-class support or something along those lines. We see that a lot.
Or trusted advisor. I mean, tell me it's somebody you work with you don't trust.
Yeah, and I mean, so to a certain degree, trust is a really important element, right? That we're going to have to, well, it is for most, but we're going to have to think of that. We're going to have to at least consider trust. But it's like, yeah, you know, how do we get there without really being so blunt about it?
Yeah.
And so, so we'll go through that, and then sort of lost my thought there, but yeah, you're right. Basically, we'll go through and sort of slash those sort of common phrases out, because you really do want to sort of stay away from that. That answers your question. So I know we're getting a little short in time. I want to kind of push through this here. And a quick client example. This is a company that we work with called DataTrack. They are one of the leaders in clinical trials software, sort of project management software. They compete. Their biggest competition is a company that people have heard of called Oracle. How do you compete with the mega monster of Oracle? And so that, you know, this was a big experience for us. It really kind of helped us in a lot of different ways as an agency. I would say we really grew a lot in this situation, because we work with their C-suite, and this is a large company, previously publicly traded, that has, I think, gone back private, international, high revenues. And it was to sort of go, and then also given the fact that they're working in a certain market, that we do a lot of healthcare work, but you know, when we started this process, we had not done as much on the biotech or pharma side. Now within the last couple of years, we've done more in that area, but essentially we had to create every single piece of sort of messaging you can think of. We had to go through this whole process that I'm explaining to you right now, but in a lot more detail than what I'm really touching on. And the end result was very helpful for them. You know, they have essentially seen a lot of sort of, I guess they've shed a light on a lot of different areas in their company through that process as well. But we had to do, really my point here is that we really did have to break down and do messaging for every single sort of piece that you could think of, from solutions to market to services to the core. And we ended up, from that, being able to have that again as a foundation and as a basis to where we were able to write a lot of their web copy as well. And so this is just an example, but you can really go in really deep on this. And I understand that most folks are probably not going to go that far down this path, but we've also done it where we've done more surface level sort of rebranding as well. But there are definitely extremes that you can go down. So then the creative execution, you know, I'm a music person. I had to throw Madonna in here because, you know, she expressed herself. But you basically,
it was a younger, better Madonna.
You're basically not going down that road. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, Madonna was Madonna, and Madonna is Madonna. She's her. She's unique. She is who she is. And you kind of want to be able to think about that whenever we've gone through the whole process of the rebranding with your company, that, you know, we've gone through the discovery, the positioning, the evaluation, the evaluation, the messaging, and then at that point we really kind of have a lot of things figured out in terms of that side of the brand. Well, at this point we're talking about visualizing the brand, and that's where we start thinking about our identity, our logo, materials, online, and so that, you know, this is where I think a lot of people sometimes they will work with two different consultants or companies and things. This is something that we do together. We believe it works much better when we do them together. But you know, there are some really simple things to consider in that. Everything from colors to fonts and graphics. You know, what types of sort of feelings and emotions are you trying to express there? And so there's that aspect of the branding process, which is the creative execution. Has anyone ever bought anything from IKEA? Because if you have, you've probably seen this before. The frowny face stick figure guy, because he did not do something correctly, did not follow a certain step correctly. And not that you have to follow these steps exactly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but what can happen is that you might find yourself that you've missed something that was very important, and you're going to have to basically go back and deconstruct what you've done to try to find what was something that you missed that could have been very, very important to your overall marketing plan, which in result is going to typically affect your overall revenue. And so results, why does it all matter? What is the purpose of kind of going through a branding exercise? And this is kind of where the branding aspects of what we have accomplished to this point will sort of be a handoff to the marketing strategy, because the branding is really the foundation of not only your company, but the foundation of your marketing plan. And as you're going through your marketing plan, you'll find that there are lots of elements, things that you covered during the branding process that will be used and sort of integrated into the marketing plan. And of course, the relationship between marketing and sales is something that probably requires its own conversation. But the marketing strategy, in most cases, if you're a sales-driven organization that that actually has people out there doing sales, or outside sales folks or inside sales folks, that's a really important conversation, sort of the relationship between the marketing strategy and the sales team, that handoff. But I just wanted to make sure that I did touch on that, sort of going from the brand strategy, the branding, to marketing, to sales.
I thought the handoff between marketing and sales was just people going to the website and signing up. Sales has to do something, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you too well, Eric. Could you say that again?
The handoff between marketing and sales is a contentious effort, right? Because sales wants better leads further down the pipeline, and getting that marketing position statement right and excluding people who aren't the right fit for your business is kind of really the core of that. It's still sales' job to sell the stuff.
Yeah, if marketing has done their job correctly, it should make sales' job much easier. Now, as a salesperson, if you're an outside salesperson and you're out in the field and you're making calls, having meetings, and you have your job to sort of build a relationship, build a rapport, be able to offer what your customer needs, and to get the business end of the deal done. But you don't want the sales team to go out blindly and not really know what our mission is. What are we trying to say? Are we consistently saying what we're supposed to say? What strategies are we implementing to actually reach our customers and engage our customers? What is our lead generation strategy? If you are a salesperson and you don't really know the answers to those things, your job is really going to be a little bit harder. Now, you could be a master salesperson and still make it happen, and that's a lot of people do that. But who wants to sort of exert more energy than they need to? If these things are answered for you, sort of the roadmap is there, it makes it a lot easier. So that's what, yes, it is a constant, fluid sort of relationship that needs to happen between sales and marketing. Now, if you are if you're selling an app online, you don't have an active sales force, or if you're like a restaurant or a retail location, you don't really have an active sales force, then your marketing plan is sort of your sales team in a way, and then it becomes that much more important in terms, you know what I mean? So that's what I would say there. But thinking about your marketing strategy, and we maybe at some point we'll go into this deeper, but I just wanted to sort of give you sort of the high-level things that would go into a marketing strategy. You want to think about it year versus quarter. So what we'll do oftentimes is, actually I met with a client yesterday, and we were just talking about this, where we're moving into fourth quarter. So we're thinking, well, at least when we're thinking about goals and then priorities for how we're going to accomplish some of these things, what do we need to get accomplished here in fourth quarter to meet our actual annual goals, but also to meet our quarterly goals? And then what are we looking at into the next year? So we're actually kind of, in a way, working on two different things there. But we need to keep that timetable as an important piece of the strategy. Goals and objectives. One thing there is just keep it doable, really just kind of keep it somewhat attainable, because, you'll find yourself sort of reaching for the stars, which is great, but it's not, you will be disappointed if you if you set the expectations sometimes too high, I think. So I think make the goals and objectives realistic. We will go back and do some of the things, or we'll at least revisit some of the audience segmentation and the messaging piece that we have hopefully had already done through the branding exercise. But we'll basically at this point go back again, look at that again, and think about how that's going to fit into our strategy and add that in. So that needs to be in the strategy as well. When it comes to the actual, in the plan, when it comes to the actual strategy, what are we doing to get new customers, and then how are we going to engage with our customers? So the customer acquisition, customer retention part of it, we have to look at it online versus offline. And so we break down strategies that way. And then we'll go into responsibilities and schedules because someone has to do these things. All these great ideas that we come up with, we don't want to just create this and it sits in a folder somewhere. This has to be a live, action-oriented plan. So project schedules need to be tied into this. We use a Gantt chart, so that needs to be used. And if you use any sort of project management system internally, we use something called Basecamp. This stuff is sort of the plan, and then all these things get entered in with timetables, responsibilities, and everything, so people know what they're doing. And then budgets, in some cases, we will go, and help clients sort of develop their budgets. In other cases, they already have that in place, and we're just sort of making sure that things that we're recommending fit in line. And then the metrics. So how are we going to measure the effectiveness of some of these things that we're doing? And that's very different by customer, by set of strategies that we're implementing. So that would be some of the things to consider. And then a few best practices here. So the reason why we're doing this is to really plan ahead. But again, as I mentioned, this has to be flexible. It has to be fluid. So this needs to be a live, action-oriented plan. And I think if you've never done this, or if you haven't gone through this exercise before, keep it simple and keep it kind of again attainable at first, and you can grow it from there. If you have done this and you have had a plan in place, then we can kind of expand that out. Or if you all of a sudden have landed that one big client or that big set of customers that has changed the game for you a little bit, then let's expand out and figure out how we can make this better. And maybe we can even shift the marketing plan a little bit more in a customer retention mode. And then I definitely think it's helpful to hire a consultant or an agency, a trusted advisor, in quotation marks, or a friend or someone to give you feedback. Because if you try to take this on your own, there's a good chance that you're just living too close, to everything. That it's going to be hard for you to really kind of give that outside perspective. And so I would definitely recommend consider that. And that will take me to the end of where I'm at here today, but I'm happy to take any other questions if anyone has any.
Yeah. So I've got a couple here, and so you had mentioned earlier about it being kind of easier to brand a product versus a service, and so the question here is around budgets and services. So, is there too little to spend on branding and marketing to not make it worthwhile, especially if you're a service company, or kind of maybe some ground rules around that?
Well, when it comes to branding, again, that's something that is more or less an exercise that should be done, depending on the company, but maybe every couple of years. At least the evaluation, you may evaluate your brand annually, but you may not go through a complete rebrand exercise every couple of years. At least that's sort of the norm. More progressive companies will want to continue to keep that cutting edge, so they'll do that more. So you have to look at that as more, at the most, I should say, an annual investment, not an ongoing investment on the branding side. And on the marketing side, people will ask, well, how about percentages or things like that? It's hard to say. There are some, sort of industry norms, but they're all different, as a thing, depending on who you are. So I would really need to have sort of a conversation with, if that was your question, with whoever asked that question, to find out a little bit more about your industry and company, and then maybe give you some feedback on any experiences that we may have had with other clients in terms of what their spending may maybe in terms of allocating budget for marketing.
So you mentioned breaking branding and marketing budgets apart. Kind of maybe when does branding stop and marketing begin? Any guidance you can give around that?
Yeah, well, so I guess it's sort of two different answers that are, sort of go against each other, because they should be happening together at all times. You should always be brand conscious, right? You should always be thinking about the brand and think about where, how you're positioned in the market. Those are all things that you should constantly be thinking about, but the investment piece of it and the sort of deep dive piece of it probably doesn't happen, but like I mentioned, every couple of years. But the handoff, the official handoff, if you're going, let's say you've decided today I'm going to go through a rebranding process. Well, you would go through this process that we just talked about, and then you essentially would take those things and start to implement those into a marketing plan. So it typically makes sense to just go right into a marketing plan from there. And then the marketing plan becomes action-oriented at that point. And so it becomes sort of a very sort of continuous action-oriented process from there. That's what tends to be the most successful. And then, as I mentioned, the relationship between marketing and sales, if you have a sales team, in another conversation.
So, and one thing that I learned from the presentation here, and when neophytes like myself think about rebranding, you immediately go to what's the new website going to look like? And I think the thing that I took home from going through this with you is there's a step before that, and that's really focusing on honing in on that unique selling position and the message around which you're going to wrap all the stuff that looks nice, right?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, some of the common misconceptions there, which are, people will often think of branding as like the website or as just
the new logo.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. But the thing is that even if we do a lot of website work, but if we're contracted to do a website, and the client has already gone through a rebranding process, or maybe they have it, but they don't really want to really go through that process. We still have to do something. So we still employ a very similar process that what I just showed you guys before we get started on a project like a website, because we still have to come up with a lot of stuff that's going to be tied. I mean, the website is brand oriented, right? And it's all about the brand in a lot of ways, and all about lead generation or educating or informing your customers in a certain way. But we have to kind of go, at least at a service level, we have to go through that process to make sure we're making the best recommendations on the website. I mean, we can't just go in there and just blindly sort of, well, I mean, we can, but I can tell you that, it's not going to be ultimately, it's not going to be the best product. It's not going to be the best final product that you really need. So it's always helpful to have this stuff already done, or to go through it, or at the very least, go through it at a very high level when you're talking about something like a website or a logo.
Gotcha. All right, and last question I've got here is kind of it's a general. There's two questions, kind of the same thing, and it's how to get started. And I guess my question to you would be, I'm a book guy. Is there maybe a favorite book that you have on this, or maybe is there an engagement practice that you guys have where you'll do kind of a quick review with people, or just if you were in a situation and you're head of a 25, 30-person company, you see value in this, what's your next step?
I would want to make sure first that, so if you are, well, it really depends on who you are in the company. I guess if you're in that 30-person company and you're the director of marketing, you obviously you need to get buy-in, complete buy-in from all of the leadership team to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of what we want to do, what we need to do, and what we're sort of set out to accomplish with this. Because we've had those experiences where it was, the charge was being led by one or two people, but the leadership team consisted of 5 people. Well, three of those people really weren't bought in on this, so they weren't contributing, and then in the end, you're left with sort of half-hearted results in a way. At least results in terms of how they view it. The results may still be good and adequate, but since the team wasn't bought in, there are issues there. So And then I would say that's the number one thing. Have team buy-in. And again, I do think it's always helpful to have sort of a third party to work with. At the very least, to kind of have come in and give you some feedback on, maybe having to come in for sort of a strategy or planning session or two at the very least. Because it's just hard. It's just, as we've learned on our, for ourselves, it's just hard to do it. To do this kind of thing on your own without having some outside perspective. And then you asked about a book. I mean, really anything written by Seth Godin is for the most part, gold in terms of marketing. I would recommend looking through his stuff. There's just sort of throwing everything out kind of type of book. There's a book called Rework. If anyone's ever heard of that, it's written by the founders of 37 Signals, which created Basecamp. And sort of, they've sort of, it's a little bit cutting edge in terms of, they really sort of just debunk a lot of traditional business wisdom when it comes to branding and marketing. And some things I agree with and some things I don't, but it was a very interesting perspective in terms of their approach. And it sort of made me think about things a little bit differently. And like I mentioned, some things I thought were a little extreme, but it's a good book to read if you haven't read it before. And then taking it to the sales end of things, sort of the marketing and handoff to sales. And there's a book called Pitch Anything that I would recommend for everyone to read too, because it sort of changes how you can, at least it changed my approach to the idea of pitching ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which happens in every business. I mean, you could be meeting with a vendor and you're trying to get them to help you with something, and you're just trying to pitch them your idea. Their strategies to help you with that. In our case, we're pitching creative, or we're pitching strategies and ideas to our clients. It helped me understand better ways to express and to get points across. So I would recommend that book. But on the branding marketing side, Seth Godin is sort of the king.
Outstanding. Outstanding. All right, listen, Brandon, I really appreciate you taking the time to share this information with you. I know I've learned a lot, and based on the questions we're getting, people, this is kind of top of mind. So I really appreciate it. I'm hoping that you will agree to come back and kind of give the marketing side of things. Is that okay? Can I get you on record saying that you'll do that?
Absolutely. We'd love to do it again.
Excellent. Excellent.
So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brandon.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.